Hello, everybody. Act 1 and Act 2 of Arcane has been released, and we're going to talk about only Act 1 here, but even we ended up talking about Act 2, I'm gonna put spoiler alert so you don't get spoiled. Without any further ado, let's go into it. So, if you have watched the end of Act 1 of Arcane, then you obviously know what I'm talking about. That who to blame for the unfortunate thing that happened that night and what is going to happen because of that event. So, who do you blame? Powder or Vi? This question was all around me when the Act 1 ended. So, to understand this, we need to look away from our audience perspective and have to look from the character's perspective. We're going to talk about Powder here. In the first scene, we can see the most terrifying thing that Vi and Powder had to witness. We can see that Powder covers up her eyes to avoid seeing the bloodshed, but ended up watching their parents' dead bodies. Since Riot has confirmed that Powder age in Act 1 was 7, we can assume that in this scene she is much younger. And you can get it, that's how she got that unstable mentality. Powder has childhood trauma, and this trauma gets worse in the future if you know what is going to happen next. Childhood trauma is defined as the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful, which often result in mental and physical effect. And you can see that it does really. She still has the mental issues when we fast forward a few years. From the start of Act 1, you can easily see how she is not ready and not experienced. She knew she was a burden to her team, and even Milo straight up said this to her every time she messes up. Milo also called her JInx, which means a person that brings bad luck. Despite all of this, her only source of hope and believing herself is none other than her sister Vi. We can see the first heist of Jay's lab. When Powder was afraid to make a jump, Vi told her that she was ready and she can do it. Even though she does not trust herself fully whether she was going to make it or not, but she trusts her sister than any other person. Her word meant everything to her. So when Vi and the gang prepared to rescue Vander, Powder also started to get prepared, but Vi said that she cannot go with her. Obviously, Vi said this because deep down she knows that Powder is not ready, and taking her on this dangerous mission could be a really bad idea. As I know how this particular scene plays, during the argument, Vi straightforward says to Powder that she is not ready. After all the time Vi said that she was ready, she suddenly changed the mind and said to Powder that she is not ready, which is really which must be really confusing to Powder. As I mentioned before, Vi's word means a lot to Powder. By saying she is not ready, it also means she is not useful in this mission. To Powder, it also means that she is indeed a burden to her team, and now even her sister does not believe in her. And after that, we ended up seeing an emotional breakdown of Powder, which is really expected if you consider all of the things that I just said. She also wants to help her family and not want to become a burden to them. As she saw the hex crystal, she knew that she can help her family this time. At this time, all that was on the mind of Powder was to help her family improve herself. Even going to the side, she did not use the monkey bomb immediately. From her perspective, she could only see the part of the bridge and the corridor that connects to the room where Vander was. After she saw Vi got beaten by a mutant guy and was taking cover behind the door that is also going to break soon, I have to say the tension that Riot has created in this scene is just amazing. It really shows how close everything was, despite it was not close. From Powder's perspective, she didn't know what was going inside. She also didn't know that Clagger was able to break the wall at the last moment. All she knew that the door is going to break soon. If she didn't use her bomb now, her family would die. And she obviously, as a child and new to Hex Crystal, she didn't know the power of Hex Crystal. She didn't know the consequences of her action would be that tragic. After she comes to Vi, and her words were that her innovation worked for the first time in her life, and you can clearly see how happy she was that she was able to help her family for the first time. Now imagine all you ever wanted to do was to help your family, but your action killed them. She does not have a big goal or some selfish desire. She only wants to protect her family. And by accident, she messes up completely. The purest motivation drove her into insanity that is a character is building. I wanted to say that absolute the moment when Powder started to realize and start to look around and understand the terror around her. She cries out and says her best intention that she only wanted to help and she was saving them. This obviously was a lot to her after getting punched in her face by her sister, most probably for the first time, and also hearing that she's a Jinx from her sister, whose word meant everything to her. Powder cried to Vi by her full name, Violet, so you really know she was hanging on to her last train. After Vi stands up, you can see at Powder. You can look at Powder. After Vi stands up, you can look at Powder. Seeing someone who looks up to her sister that much, suddenly recoil in fear, really breaks my heart. I can't imagine what emotion would be going through Powder's mind to have her only source of love and stability suddenly become her worst fear and pain. You can hear her emotion of desperation while she cries for her sister. We know that Vi wanted to come back for Powder, but she couldn't. But from the Powder perspective, she begs for Vi to come back. But Vi never come back for her. To her eyes, Vi has abandoned her. Now, a lot of people have questioned Powder since she went to her enemy, Silco. But there is a thing, I most probably think that she did not see Silco in the factory because Silco was standing in the darkness at the end of the bridge. So when Silco comes to her, she hugs him because she really needs someone. And obviously, Silco didn't kill Powder because he was seeing himself in Powder. Now, a lot of people ask a lot of questions. First, everything could have been avoided if Jinx listened to Vi and stay at home. But that you need to understand, without Jinx's monkey bomb, it would have been easily a reality where Powder's whole family would be dead and she'd be waiting for her family to show up, but they never did. And she would blame herself for not being useful when her family needed her. Since the whole situation was really close, it's really hard to assume what would have happened if Powder didn't show up. Just like life, a lot of things happened around us and it could have been prevented with the smallest decisions. And those smallest decisions sometimes lead to a bigger outcome later on. And so it's really hard to assume what would have happened if things didn't show up. But the main thing is, sometimes we don't have the control over luck or fate. What happened to Powder is just an accident. Now, if we talk from the vibe perspective, she also have a tragic childhood, but her mentality is really strong, as we can see so far. A lot of people say that why did Vi slapped Powder and left Powder? Everybody knows why she did that. A lot of people misunderstood that she left Powder, but she did not. While I was writing this, suddenly Riot released the screenplay of that particular scene. They cleared everything up in that video. I would link that video in the description if you really wanted to see, but I will give a little bit of summary and what I thought of it. After slapping Powder, she stares at the blood on her hand and looks in disbelief. Then Vi looks at Powder, thinking, what have I done? And sees the fear in Powder's eyes For the first time, she knows that she has to get herself away from Powder to calm herself and to process the fact that her whole family is dead by her sister who only wanted to help them in the first place. When you look at her hand, as an audience, I remember Bandish said this, that fists do not solve anything, rather than they create more. Another thing I really wanted to say that there was a scene where the whole lab was in a flame while Vi was on the floor, and she saw the dead bodies of her brothers and the monkey face of Powder's mom and cried. This scene is very underrated. Personally, I love that scene. It showed the Vi's horror when she realized that her brothers were dead, and it must have been Powder who did this. Vi did not want to believe it was Powder who caused this and started to cry in pain. The way they animated Vi's pain was breathtaking. A lot of people forget that Vi is also a teen. Expecting so much from her is also bad. I just wanted to say blaming Powder or Vi is not right. A lot of bad thing happens in our life or around us, and small thing could have prevented the outcome. But it is easy to say that from the third person perspective, like we are as an audience. We can see every smallest detail, what each and every character did leading up to this big outcome. But the people who blame Vi and Powder is also, like I just said, looking from a third person perspective. I think anybody who thought of both perspective does not blame anyone because they see the world from the eyes of Vi and Powder. They sees the both side and they know that nobody did nothing wrong. And they know whatever happened to Vi and Powder is just an accident or maybe a tragic fate.